Long before he became famous, Alexander was born in a hard northern kingdom. He was born in 356 BC, the son of King Philip and Queen Olympias. His father, Philip II, was turning Macedonia into a powerful military state. Philip's army used long spears that made his soldiers almost impossible to break. But inside the royal family, love, pride, and fear lived together. From childhood, Alexander learned that kingship meant danger, duty, and blood. He was curious, proud, emotional, and hungry to prove himself. Alexander loved stories of Achilles, heroes, honor, and immortal glory. South of Macedonia, the Greek city-states were proud, brilliant, and divided. They shared language and culture, but they often fought each other. Philip wanted to control Greece and prepare for a greater war. Alexander listened carefully because one day these choices would become his own. When Alexander was 13, Aristotle became his teacher. Aristotle taught him science, medicine, poetry, politics, and Greek culture. On maps, Alexander saw lands that seemed to call his name. But Alexander did not want only knowledge. He wanted greatness. One famous story says Alexander tamed Bucephalus by understanding his fear. Philip saw his son's courage and told him to seek a kingdom worthy of him. Alexander's life would always stand between wisdom and violence. As Alexander grew older, Macedonia prepared for war with Greece. He learned that courage alone was not enough. An army needed order. Philip was not only a king, he was a patient and dangerous strategist. Alexander admired Philip, but he also feared living under his shadow. In Macedonia, honor was bright, but failure could destroy a man. In 338 BC, Philip moved against the powerful Greek alliance. For once, old rivals stood side by side against Macedonia. Alexander, still a teenager, commanded part of the Macedonian army. At Chaeronea, Alexander showed courage that soldiers would remember. The Greek alliance was defeated, and Macedonia became the strongest power in Greece. He had tasted victory, but he had also seen its terrible cost. After Chaeronea, Philip forced the Greek cities into a new league. The Greeks were united, but not always by love or trust. Philip now planned to invade Persia, the greatest empire of the age. But inside the palace, Alexander's place suddenly felt less secure. Philip's new marriage created fear about Alexander's future as heir. An insult at the feast turned family tension into open anger. Alexander and Philip quarreled, revealing the dangerous cracks inside the dynasty. For a time, Alexander left the kingdom that he hoped to inherit. He returned later, but trust inside the royal house was never fully restored. In 336 BC, Philip appeared before his people during a great celebration. Few people noticed the assassin moving through the crowd. Philip was murdered before his invasion of Persia could begin. The kingdom was powerful, but without Philip, it could fall apart. At only 20 years old, Alexander became king of Macedonia. Many accepted him quickly, but some waited for weakness. For Alexander, becoming king meant acting fast and without hesitation. News of Philip's death encouraged enemies to challenge the young king. Alexander first secured the north, proving he was not an easy target. He fought tribes near Macedonia's borders and forced them back. His quick victories sent a clear message across the region. Meanwhile, false rumors made some Greek cities believe Alexander was gone. Thebes rebelled, hoping to break free from Macedonian control. Alexander arrived faster than anyone expected and offered a final chance. When Thebes refused, Alexander attacked with terrible force. The city was destroyed, and Greece understood Alexander's message. He had secured Greece, but his rule now carried a shadow. After Thebes, most Greek cities chose obedience over destruction. Now Alexander could turn toward the dream his father had left unfinished. He would not only punish Persia, he wanted to surpass every king before him. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia, and history changed direction. Alexander stepped into Asia with a small army and a very large dream. According to tradition, he threw a spear and claimed Asia as won by arms. Near Troy, Alexander walked through a place filled with heroic memory. He honored Achilles, the warrior he admired more than any other. For Alexander, the old stories were not dead. They were a challenge. His army moved inland, where Persian forces were already gathering. The Persian governors did not believe this young invader would last long. At the Granicus River, Alexander faced his first great test in Asia. The crossing was dangerous, but Alexander chose attack over delay. He charged into the water, turning risk into a weapon. During the battle, Alexander came dangerously close to death. The Macedonians won, and Asia Minor began to open before him. The victory shocked local rulers and weakened Persian confidence. Many Greek cities in Asia Minor welcomed him as a liberator, but liberation also meant that Alexander gained power over them. Each surrendered city made his campaign stronger and his name larger. Some cities resisted, and Alexander had to show patience and force. Sieges taught him that conquest was not only speed and courage. By controlling the coast, Alexander weakened Persian naval power. The campaign continued through hardship, distance, hunger, and cold nights. His soldiers followed him because he shared danger beside them. Behind every victory were tired feet, empty stomachs, and fear. At Gordium, Alexander found a strange legend tied to kingship. People said whoever untied the knot would rule Asia. Alexander looked at the problem, but he did not accept its rules. He cut the knot with his sword and turned legend into propaganda. The story spread quickly, making Alexander seem chosen by fate. But far east, the Persian king Darius was preparing a greater response. Darius ruled a vast empire, and he could not ignore Alexander now. Across the empire, men were called to stop the Macedonian advance. Alexander moved south, but geography began to shape the next battle. Darius moved behind him, cutting his route and forcing a confrontation. The narrow ground reduced Persia's advantage in numbers. At Issus, Alexander and Darius faced each other for the first time. The Macedonian phalanx pushed forward with discipline and deadly control. Alexander drove straight toward Darius, aiming at the heart of Persia. As the Macedonians came closer, Darius saw the battle turning. The Persian army broke, and Darius fled from the battlefield. Alexander captured the royal camp and saw Persia's enormous wealth. He treated Darius's family with respect, strengthening his image as a king. Darius offered peace, land, and wealth if Alexander would stop. Alexander refused. He did not want half an empire. He wanted all of it. Instead of chasing Darius immediately, Alexander secured the coast. Many Phoenician cities surrendered, weakening Persia's control of the sea. But Tyre stood on an island and refused to fully obey him. The city seemed protected by the sea itself. Alexander ordered his men to build a road through the water. The work was slow, dangerous, and attacked from every side. Tyre resisted fiercely, and Alexander's patience turned into obsession. When more ships joined him, Alexander could finally attack from the sea. After months of siege, Macedonian forces broke into the city. Tyre fell, and the punishment was brutal, shocking the region. The siege showed his genius, but also the darkness of his will. On the road to Egypt, Gaza also refused to surrender. The siege was difficult, and Alexander was wounded during the fighting. His men saw that their fearless king could still bleed. When Gaza fell, the road to Egypt finally opened. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. Egyptian priests honored him, and Alexander accepted the role of pharaoh. On Egypt's coast, he founded Alexandria, a city made for memory. After founding Alexandria, Alexander crossed the desert toward the oracle of Siwa. The journey was dangerous, dry, and filled with uncertainty. In the desert, even a small mistake could mean death. At last, the oasis appeared, quiet and sacred in the empty desert. Inside the temple, priests received him with mystery and ceremony. Alexander wanted answers about his power, his future, and his place in history. What the oracle said remains unclear, but Alexander left changed. Many began to see him not only as king, but as something greater. But divine honor did not end the war. Darius still ruled in the east. Alexander left Egypt and turned back toward the heart of Persia. His army crossed great distances, held together by discipline and belief. Darius again offered peace, land, and treasure to stop the invasion. Some men might have accepted. Alexander wanted complete victory. The next battle would decide the future of the Persian Empire. Near Gaugamela, Darius chose open ground for his massive army. Darius brought men from across the empire to crush Alexander. Darius prepared scythed chariots to break the Macedonian lines. For Darius, this was more than battle. It was survival. Alexander looked at the great army before him and did not retreat. His men knew that morning could bring victory or death. The fate of kings depended on ordinary men holding their ground. At dawn, the two armies moved into position. It was not just two armies, it was two worlds colliding. The Persian chariots charged, hoping to tear open the phalanx. The Macedonians opened their ranks and let the chariots pass. The weapon meant to cause panic failed against trained discipline. In the chaos, Alexander saw the moment he needed. He drove his cavalry like a spear toward Darius himself. At the center of the storm, Alexander seemed impossible to stop. Darius watched the Macedonian attack break toward his position. As pressure grew, the Persian center began to fall apart. Darius fled again, and with him went the hope of Persian victory. Alexander wanted pursuit, but his army still needed him on the field. His soldiers held firm, turning danger into complete victory. After Gaugamela, the heart of the Persian Empire lay open. Alexander now moved toward Babylon, one of the great cities of the world. Babylon welcomed him, choosing peace instead of destruction. The city showed Alexander the beauty and wealth of ancient empire. The treasures of Persia were greater than many Macedonians had imagined. He began to act not only as conqueror, but as ruler of Asia. Now Alexander had to rule people who did not share his language or customs. From Babylon, Alexander moved to Susa, another royal center of Persia. The treasury of Susa gave him money to continue his impossible campaign. With Persian wealth, Alexander rewarded soldiers and secured their loyalty. But the road to Persepolis passed through dangerous mountains. At the Persian gates, defenders used the land against him. For a moment, Alexander's army was trapped and bleeding. Then Alexander found another route through the mountains. By night, his men climbed around the defenders. At dawn, the defenders were surprised, and the pass was taken. Beyond the mountains stood Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia. Alexander entered the city as the new master of the empire. Every carved wall told him how great Persia had been. The wealth of Persepolis confirmed the scale of Alexander's conquest. But celebration, anger, and revenge soon created a darker moment. The palace of Persepolis was set on fire, becoming a symbol of revenge. The flames showed victory, but also the violence inside conquest. Even in triumph, Alexander faced the shadow of his own ambition. But Darius was still alive, and Alexander could not leave him free. The conquest would not feel complete until the Persian king was found. Alexander rode east, determined to capture Darius and finish the war. The pursuit was brutal, and many men struggled to keep moving. Far from home, even glory depended on water, food, and endurance. Darius was betrayed by his own men before Alexander could reach him. When Alexander found him, the Persian king was already dying. Alexander covered Darius with his cloak and honored him as a king. With Darius dead, the old Persian Empire had no true ruler. Alexander now claimed to be the rightful ruler of Asia. But many Macedonians did not like seeing their king become Persian. Even royal clothing became a sign of power, fear, and change. Alexander pushed into Bactria, chasing rebels and new enemies. The land itself became an enemy of the tired army. Bessus, one of Darius's betrayers, claimed the Persian throne for himself. Alexander would not allow a traitor to wear the crown of Persia. Bessus was captured, punished, and removed from Alexander's path. But killing rivals did not mean the empire was truly controlled. In Sogdiana, Alexander faced resistance unlike anything before. The rebels used mountains, speed, and surprise instead of large battles. The war became smaller, harsher, and more difficult to end. His men had followed him far, but they wanted an end. Rebel strongholds stood high in the mountains, protected by nature. Alexander sent men to climb cliffs that seemed impossible to take. One slip could send a man into darkness below. When defenders saw Macedonians above them, the fortress surrendered. There, Alexander met Roxana, a noblewoman from the region. Their marriage joined love, politics, and the need to control the East. The marriage helped, but many wounds in the region remained open. Alexander founded cities to hold roads, borders, and conquered lands. These cities carried Greek culture far beyond the Mediterranean world. Conquest began to change not only borders, but also cultures. When Alexander adopted Persian court customs, many Macedonians felt insulted. Some Greeks believed no free man should bow like that. The question was simple, but dangerous. Was Alexander a king or a god? As Alexander rose higher, trust around him began to weaken. One night, anger and wine led to a terrible mistake. Clitus had saved Alexander's life, but now they fought with bitter words. The argument grew out of control, and no one could calm the king. In a moment of fury, Alexander killed Clitus with a spear. The room became silent, and Alexander understood what he had done. He grieved deeply, but the dead friend could not return. Even after tragedy, the campaign continued farther east. Alexander began adding local soldiers to his growing imperial army. Many veterans feared that Alexander no longer valued them as before. The empire was growing, but unity was becoming harder. To Alexander, every new border seemed to point toward another one. Peace never satisfied him for long. He always looked beyond the map. Stories of India filled his mind with new dreams and questions. To reach India, the army first had to cross brutal mountains. The cold, hunger, and thin air punished every step. But once again, Alexander's army survived what seemed impossible. Beyond the mountains, the army entered lands unlike any they knew. Some rulers submitted, hoping peace was safer than resistance. Others resisted, forcing Alexander into more hard fighting. Then the soldiers heard of war elephants, animals they had never faced. Beyond the river waited Porus, a king ready to defend his land. Between Alexander and Porus stood a river swollen by rain. Both kings watched each other, waiting for weakness or mistake. Storms, darkness, and deception would shape the coming battle. At night, Alexander moved upstream, hiding his crossing from Porus. Before sunrise, the army crossed, and the greatest eastern battle began. Alexander crossed the river before Porus could stop him. The battlefield was wet, confused, and dangerous for both armies. Porus did not run. He prepared to fight like a king. The war elephants brought fear that Macedonians had never known. The horses were frightened, and the battle became harder. Alexander used speed, pressure, and movement to break the enemy line. In the center, the elephants crushed men and broke formations. The phalanx held, but the cost was terrible. Even in the storm, Alexander searched for the winning moment. Porus fought bravely, even as his army began to collapse. Slowly, Alexander's pressure turned resistance into defeat. Alexander asked Porus how he wished to be treated. Porus answered simply, "Treat me like a king." Alexander respected his courage and allowed him to rule under his authority. Around this time, Alexander lost Persepolis, his beloved horse. The loss reminded him that conquest could not protect everything he loved. He founded a city, Persepolis, to honor his companion. But Alexander still wanted to go farther east. His soldiers had marched for years across worlds they barely understood. To Alexander, the map still promised glory. To his men, it promised death. At the Hyphasis River, the army finally refused to continue. Alexander felt betrayed, but his soldiers had reached their limit. For the first time, his will could not move his own army. At last, Alexander agreed to turn back west. He built altars to mark the farthest point of his journey. Alexander prepared a fleet to travel down the rivers toward the sea. The army sailed and marched through lands still filled with danger. Some local peoples resisted fiercely as Alexander moved south. At one city, Alexander climbed ahead and became trapped inside. An arrow struck him deeply, and many thought he would die. His soldiers fought wildly to reach their wounded king. He survived, but the wound showed how fragile even legends are. When the soldiers saw him alive, their fear turned into relief. The return through Gaugamela became one of his hardest decisions. Heat, thirst, and hunger killed many more than battle. When offered water, Alexander refused to drink alone before his men. The gesture gave courage, even when it could not give water. Those who survived carried the memory of terrible loss. The army returned west, but it was no longer the same army. At Susa, Alexander tried to join Macedonian and Persian elites through marriage. But many veterans felt replaced by the new soldiers of the empire. At Opis, anger between Alexander and his veterans exploded. He reminded them of their victories, rewards, and shared suffering. At last, king and soldiers reconciled, but the wound remained. Then Alexander lost Hephaestion, his closest companion and trusted friend. His grief was deep, public, and almost impossible to control. In 323 BC, Alexander returned to Babylon with new plans. Even after so much conquest, Alexander was planning more campaigns. No one knew where his ambition would finally start. After a banquet, Alexander became seriously ill. The man who crossed empires for his power. Yet his conquests spread Greek culture across a wider world. His face, name, and legend survived long after his empire broke. Alexander conquered more than anyone expected, but never conquered his own desire. His life was short, his empire was fragile, but his impact changed history.